At 0400 hours on February 7, 1945, Corporal James Theodore Mackenzie crouched in a shell crater 200 yards behind American lines near Bastogne, Belgium, mixing axle grease with diesel fuel in a dented canteen cup. 22 years old, 11 months of combat, 2 Purple Hearts, and absolutely nobody believed his plan would work. The temperature was 14 degrees below zero. The Battle of the Bulge had been raging for 53 days, and the Germans were preparing another armored push with 8 Tiger tanks that intelligence said would hit their position by dawn. Mackenzie stirred the mixture with a screwdriver, watching the thick grease slowly dissolve into the fuel. Behind him, Sergeant Frank Holloway stood with arms crossed, shaking his head. "You're wasting time, Mac," Holloway said. "We need you on the machine gun, not playing chemist with kitchen supplies." Mackenzie didn't look up. He'd been thinking about this for 3 weeks, ever since he'd watched a Tiger tank shrug off 6 bazooka rounds like they were spitballs. The armor was too thick. The frontal plate was 180 millimeters of hardened steel. American tank destroyers could barely scratch it. But Mackenzie had grown up in northern Minnesota, where temperatures dropped to 40 below in January, and he knew something about machinery in extreme cold. He knew what happened to lubricants when they froze. He knew what happened to moving parts when the grease turned solid. The problem was convincing anyone to let him try. 3rd Squad had lost 19 men in the past 2 weeks. German armor kept breaking through. The Tigers would roll up to American positions, sit there like steel fortresses, methodically destroying every defensive position they could see. The 88mm main guns could hit targets at 2,000 yards. American Sherman tanks had to get within 500 yards to have any chance of penetration, and most of them died trying. The math was brutal. 1 Tiger could destroy 5 Shermans before taking significant damage. The Germans knew it. The Americans knew it. Morale was bleeding out with every armor engagement. Mackenzie had watched it happen 4 days ago. A Tiger had positioned itself 300 yards from their line, buttoned up, impossible to touch. For 2 hours, it had systematically demolished their defensive positions. Machine gun nests, mortar pits, supply dumps. The crew took their time. They weren't worried about return fire. Nothing the Americans had could hurt them. When the Tiger finally withdrew, it left behind 14 dead and 3rd Squad's forward positions in ruins. That night, Mackenzie had started thinking about the grease. Now, Holloway was staring at the canteen cup like Mackenzie had lost his mind. Even if you could get close enough to a Tiger, which you can't, how exactly are you planning to get this magic mixture into their turret mechanism? You going to knock on the hatch and ask them to open up? Mackenzie finally looked up. "I'm not going to pour it into their turret. I'm going to spray it on the turret ring." Holloway's expression didn't change. "The turret ring is underneath the tank." "No," Mackenzie said. "The turret ring is where the turret meets the hull. There's a gap maybe half an inch wide. Goes all the way around. That's where the turret bearing sits. That's what lets the turret rotate. If I can get this mixture into that gap, it'll seep down into the bearing race, mix with whatever grease is already in there, and when the temperature drops tonight, it'll freeze solid." "You're insane." "Maybe, but it'll work." Holloway shook his head. "You'd have to get within 10 yards of a Tiger tank. You'd have to stay there long enough to spray this stuff all around the turret ring while German infantry shoots at you. You'd have to do all this while somehow not getting run over or blown up. Then you'd have to hope your science experiment actually works. Then you'd have to hope the crew doesn't just dismount and fight as infantry anyway." "I know. And you think the lieutenant is going to approve this suicide mission?" "I'm not asking for approval." Holloway stared at him for a long moment. Then he sighed. "What do you need?" Mackenzie pulled out a hand-drawn schematic he'd sketched on the back of a ration box. He'd been thinking about this for 3 weeks. He'd worked through every detail. The mixture had to be thin enough to seep into the bearing gap, but thick enough to carry sufficient grease content. The ratio was critical. Too much fuel, and it wouldn't freeze properly. Too much grease, and it wouldn't penetrate. He'd settled on 3 parts diesel fuel to 1 part axle grease, mixed at room temperature, applied at ambient temperature. In 14-degree cold, it would penetrate the bearing gap within 5 minutes. When the temperature dropped to 0 or below tonight, which it would, the The mixture would crystallize. The grease would bind with the existing lubricant in the bearing race. The turret would jam. Theoretically. He needed a spray bottle, the kind medics used for disinfectant. He needed 4 more cans of axle grease from the motor pool. He needed 2 gallons of diesel fuel. He needed Holloway to not tell the lieutenant what he was planning. Most importantly, he needed to be close to a Tiger tank when the German armor came through tomorrow morning. Holloway listened to the whole plan, didn't interrupt. When Mackenzie finished, the sergeant was quiet for almost a minute. Then he said, "You really think this will work? I think it's better than waiting for another Tiger to park on our heads and blow us apart piece by piece. You know the lieutenant will court-martial me if he finds out I helped you. Tell him you tried to stop me. I should try to stop you. But you won't." Holloway sighed again, looked at the frozen landscape, looked at the destroyed positions where their friends had died 4 days ago, looked back at Mackenzie. "Get your supplies. Be ready to move at 0600. German armor usually hits around 0730. It gives you 90 minutes to get in position. If you want to see how Mackenzie's frozen grease gamble turned out, hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the men who fought with ingenuity when courage alone wasn't enough. Subscribe if you haven't already." Back to Mackenzie. At 0545, Mackenzie moved forward through the pre-dawn darkness. He carried his rifle, 4 glass bottles filled with the grease mixture, and a hand-pump spray canister he'd liberated from the battalion aid station. The medic had asked what he needed it for. Mackenzie had said killing Germans. The medic hadn't asked any follow-up questions. The American forward line was 200 yards ahead. Beyond that, no man's land stretched another 300 yards to the German positions. Mackenzie wasn't going that far. He was looking for a shell crater or a destroyed building, anywhere with cover that sat on the expected German advance route. Intelligence said the Tigers would come down the main road from Foy, then spread out to hit the American positions from multiple angles. Mackenzie needed to be somewhere along that route, somewhere close enough that when a Tiger rolled past, he could get to it before the infantry screen spotted him. He found his position at 0615, a destroyed farmhouse, just a pile of rubble now, but the cellar was still intact. The entrance was a hole in the ground, easy to miss in the half-light. Mackenzie slid down into the cellar, found a spot near the collapsed wall where he could watch the road. The German armor would pass within 20 yards of his position, maybe closer. He waited. The cold was brutal. His breath froze in the air. His fingers were already going numb inside his gloves. He flexed them, trying to keep the blood flowing. If his hands went completely numb, he wouldn't be able to work the spray pump, wouldn't be able to execute the plan, would just be sitting in a frozen cellar for no reason except to die when the Germans came through. At 0723, Mackenzie heard the engines, deep guttural rumbling that made the frozen ground vibrate. Tiger tanks, Maybach HL 230 engines, 12 cylinders, 690 horsepower, pushing 56 tons of armor at 24 miles per hour on roads, slower cross-country. Mackenzie had memorized the specifications, had studied every piece of intelligence about Tigers he could find, knew their strengths, knew their weaknesses. The weakness he was betting on was the turret traverse mechanism. It was hydraulic, powered by the main engine, but it relied on the turret ring bearing to provide smooth rotation. That bearing was lubricated with heavy grease. If that grease froze, the hydraulics couldn't overcome the friction. The turret would lock up. In theory. The first Tiger appeared through the morning fog at 0730, exactly on schedule. The tank rolled down the road at maybe 8 miles per hour, commander visible in the turret hatch, scanning for threats. Behind the Tiger, Mackenzie could see German infantry, maybe 40 soldiers using the tank for cover. Standard doctrine. Let the armor lead, let the armor take the hits. Infantry follows and exploits any breakthrough. The Tiger rolled past Mackenzie's position. He didn't move. One tank wasn't enough. He needed multiple targets, needed to prove the concept worked on more than one vehicle. If he revealed himself now for one Tiger, the German infantry would kill him before he could hit any others. The second Tiger appeared 90 seconds later. Same formation, same speed, different commander. This one looked younger, couldn't have been more than 25 years old. He was scanning the American positions ahead, not looking down at the rubble of destroyed buildings beside the road. The third Tiger came 2 minutes after that, then the fourth, then the fifth. 5 Tigers total. Mackenzie watched them all roll past his position, watched the infantry following behind them, counted 120 German soldiers, give or take. They were spreading out now, moving off the road, heading toward the American line. In another 10 minutes, they'd be in assault positions. In 15 minutes, they'd start the attack. The Tigers would sit back at 500 yards and methodically destroy every American position they could see while the infantry advanced under that covering fire. Unless Mackenzie's plan worked. He waited until the last German infantry squad passed his position, waited until they were 50 yards ahead, focused on the American line, not looking back. Then he climbed out of the cellar with his spray canister and bottles of grease mixture. The last Tiger in line had stopped moving. The crew was letting the forward tanks get into position first. The tank was 70 yards from Mackenzie's position, engine idling, commander still in the turret hatch. Mackenzie couldn't hit that one. Too exposed, too much risk. But the fourth Tiger, the one that had passed 2 minutes earlier, was now 100 yards ahead and moving slowly through a patch of rough ground. The infantry following that tank had spread out, moved away from it to avoid bunching up. There was a gap, maybe 30 seconds, where that Tiger would be isolated, no infantry within immediate visual range. Mackenzie ran, stayed low, used the broken ground for cover, 60 yards, 50. The Tiger was grinding forward, turret traversing left, crew focused on the American positions ahead. 40 yards. Mackenzie could hear German voices from the infantry somewhere to his right. They hadn't seen him yet. 30 yards. He was in the open now. If anyone looked back, if any German soldier turned around, he was dead. 20 yards. The Tiger's engine was so loud it covered any noise Mackenzie made. 10 yards. He dropped to the ground behind the tank, crawling the last bit. The exhaust was blowing hot diesel fumes in his face. The noise was overwhelming. The tank was still moving, tracks grinding through frozen mud, but slow enough that Mackenzie could keep pace crawling. He pulled out the spray canister, aimed at the turret ring, and started pumping. The mixture sprayed out in a fine mist, coating the gap where the turret met the hull. Mackenzie worked his way around the tank, spraying continuously, trying to cover the entire circumference of the turret ring. The mixture was already seeping into the gap. He could see it disappearing into the bearing race. 3 bottles empty. He grabbed the 4th, refilled the spray canister, kept going. The Tiger stopped moving. Engine still running, but the tank was stationary. Mackenzie froze. The commander was saying something. Orders to the driver. The tank started moving again, slower, turning right. The turret began to traverse. Mackenzie sprayed faster, had to finish before the crew spotted him, had to get the entire turret ring covered. 4th bottle empty. He'd done maybe 70% of the circumference. Would have to be enough. He dropped the spray canister, started crawling backward, away from the tank. A German voice shouted, "Close. Too close." Mackenzie looked right, saw a German soldier 20 yards away, rifle coming up. The soldier yelled again, alerting others. Mackenzie rolled behind a pile of rubble, pulled his rifle around, fired 3 shots. The German went down, more voices shouting now, more soldiers running toward his position. Mackenzie ran, didn't think, just ran. Back toward the American line, back toward cover. German bullets cracking past his head. He dove into a shell crater, came up shooting. Dropped 2 more Germans. A machine gun opened up, bullets tearing up the ground around him. He couldn't stay here. Rolled out of the crater, crawled 20 yards to another hole, kept moving. Behind him, the Tigers were starting their assault. The main guns fired, enormous blasts that shook the ground. Shells screamed toward the American positions. The battle was starting, and Mackenzie was stuck in no man's land with an entire German infantry company trying to kill him. He made it back to American lines at 0800 hours. 3rd Squad pulled him into their positions, demanded to know what he'd been doing out there. Mackenzie didn't answer. He was watching the Tigers through the smoke and chaos, watching to see if the grease mixture would work. The first 3 Tigers were operating normally, turrets traversing, main guns firing, everything functioning. The 4th Tiger, the one Mackenzie had hit, was moving forward, but the turret wasn't rotating. The commander was still in the hatch, looking frustrated, yelling down at his crew. The turret was locked in place, facing forward, unable to traverse left or right. The crew was trying to engage targets directly ahead, but anything on their flanks was safe. The tiger was effectively blind to 90 degrees of its surroundings. Holloway crawled over to Mackenzie's position. "Tell me that's your work." That's my work." It actually worked. "Not done yet. Temperature's dropping. Give it another hour." The battle raged for 90 minutes. The German infantry was pushing hard, trying to overwhelm the American positions before their armor advantage disappeared. But that fourth tiger was struggling. The crew had dismounted, trying to work on the turret mechanism. They'd figured out something was wrong with the bearing, but they couldn't fix it. The mixture had penetrated too deep, crystallized too thoroughly. The turret was jammed solid. At 0930, the temperature dropped to 8 degrees below zero. The weather station called it over the radio. Mackenzie watched the other tigers, watched their turrets slow down. The mixture he'd sprayed was designed to seep into bearing surfaces on contact. Even though he'd only directly treated one tiger, the overspray had probably contaminated the ground where the other tanks had passed. Their tracks had picked up the mixture, carried it forward, splashed it onto their own turret rings as they moved. Not enough to jam them immediately, but enough to contaminate their bearing grease. Enough that when the temperature dropped, when the mixture crystallized, it would start to bind. The second tiger's turret stopped rotating at 0945. The third tiger seized up at 1000 hours. By 1030, 4 out of 5 tigers were effectively immobile, their turrets frozen in place, their crews desperately trying to fix mechanical problems they didn't understand. The German attack stalled. Without the armor's traversing capability, without the ability to engage targets on their flanks, the tigers became steel coffins. American tank destroyers, which had been hiding in prepared positions, started hitting them from the sides. 2 tigers brewed up, fire and smoke pouring from their turrets. The other 2 retreated, crews abandoning the vehicles and fighting as infantry. By 1100 hours, the German assault had collapsed. The infantry fell back without armor support. The Americans held their positions. 3rd Squad had taken casualties, but they'd survived. The tigers that were supposed to break through had instead become frozen monuments to mechanical failure. Lieutenant Morrison found Mackenzie at noon. "Sergeant Holloway tells me you had something to do with those tigers jamming up." Mackenzie didn't answer. "He also tells me you went forward without orders, exposed yourself to enemy fire, and nearly got yourself killed implementing some harebrained chemistry experiment." "Yes, sir." Morrison was quiet for a moment, then he smiled. "Corps Intelligence wants to talk to you. They're calling your grease mixture a battlefield innovation. They want to replicate it, distribute it to other units. Apparently, some colonel thinks this might work on a larger scale." Mackenzie didn't care about colonels or corps intelligence. He cared that 3rd Squad was still alive, that the tigers hadn't broken through, that his frozen grease trick had actually worked. He received a Bronze Star for initiative under fire. The citation didn't mention the grease mixture specifically, just referenced his actions in disrupting enemy armor operations. By March, other units were using variations of his technique. By April, the Germans had figured out what was happening and started using different bearing lubricants. But for 2 months, Mackenzie's frozen grease trick gave American forces an edge against the tigers. Mackenzie survived the war, came home to Minnesota in July 1945, worked as a mechanic for 40 years, never talked much about the war. When people asked, he'd just say he fixed some tanks. Technically true. He died in 1992, age 69. His son found a box of papers in the attic afterward, letters from other veterans who'd served in 3rd Squad, letters thanking Mackenzie for the frozen grease trick, letters saying it saved lives. One letter from a Sherman crew commander who said they'd used Mackenzie's mixture to disable 2 tigers near Remagen, saved their entire platoon. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Every like helps share forgotten innovations from soldiers who thought outside the box. Subscribe for more stories. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. These stories matter. These men deserve to be remembered. Thank you for keeping their memories alive.